Good morning and welcome to 365 Days of Stories with Theo Mayer. Here we are, I think we're on day 60, and it is March the 1st. So, today I begin the story of the Rose of the Alahambra. Now, there was a long period of time where the Alahambra and the Generalife were really not inhabited. They were deserted. It was after the Moorish kings had they'd been conquered and no one was really inhabiting those beautiful buildings and gardens, and they fell into disrepair. Now, once the Spanish had pushed the Moors away, they inhabited the Alhambra and the Generalife for quite some time, but earthquakes frightened them away, and so they deserted that whole area. Because when the earthquakes came, those buildings shook like you can't believe, and some of them even toppled. So for quite a number of years, gardens just were overgrown and spiders inhabited every corner and nook and cranny. Bats and owls, they took up their residences in the chambers. Anyone who had seen the Alhambra or the Generalife when it was being well taken care of would have looked upon the whole area in dismay, seeing what it had become. Now, it turned out that in 1700, King Philip came to inhabit the Alhambra. And when he did, with his wife at that point in time, he brought the Alhambra and the Generalife back to life. Actually, I think it was probably around 1715 or so. It was with his second wife. Her name, I believe, was Isabella. She was an Italian princess. Now, Philip was from France. He had been born into the royal family in France, but here he was with his Italian wife now, King of Spain. And he barred no expense to bring the gardens back into a beautiful state and to bring all of the buildings into a beautifully decorated and habitable state. It turns out that there was a soldier, a Spanish soldier, who had lost his life in service of the king. His wife had died some years after the birth of their single child, a daughter. And this young woman had come to inhabit the very tower of the three princesses, Zayda, Zoraida, and Zoraheda. Now that tower had fallen into disrepair before Philip had come. In part, it was due to everything I talked about before, but it was also in part due to rumors throughout the neighborhood that tower was inhabited by the spirit of Zoraheda. People said that they could hear her playing her lute on dark evenings. Others said they could hear her moaning and sighing, calling out to her sisters and her Spanish lover. So perhaps that was bigger reason why that tower was left alone until King Philip came. But when he brought the tower back into repair, this orphaned young woman was brought there with her auntie. And her auntie was there, just like was so common in that time, to watch over her charge and make sure that no men could get to her to taint her of her innocence. Well, it turned out that on a singular day, one of the pages of the Queen was off with her favorite gyrfalcon hunting. And he'd gone off into the gardens of the Tenerife with the falcon perched on his wrist. And a bird flew up from a tree and he cast the falcon off so that it could pursue the bird. Off the bird flew and off the falcon with it. Falcon dove the bird and missed. And then, not returning to the gloved hand of the page, despite the page's calls and entreaties, the bird flew off and took rest high up on that tower that had originally been the tower of the princesses. Now the page, this was the favorite bird of the Queen, and in order not to lose favor with the Queen, he knew he must go off and catch that bird. So off he went, and he went down into the ravine where, in our previous story, the Spanish cavaliers had been put to work. And when he got out down into the ravine, he turned toward the tower and realized that there was no way to get into it. There was no entrance to the tower from that direction. And so he skirted around and was able to climb over the wall into the gardens of the Alahambra. And he made his way through these beautiful garden beds and rose bushes and finally sculpted shrubs until he came to the tower. Now the tower was in good repair, and the page found it curious, and he peeked through a small crack in the door to see what was inside. He was taken by a feminine quality that he saw exhibited in the decorations and in the furniture that was there. He could see through to the fountain. Leaning against the fountain was a guitar. There was some reels of silk there as well, and the fountain was surrounded by beautiful flowers. Hanging above the fountain to one side was a caged singing bird. He thought to himself. It reminded him of the enchanting tales that he had heard of the maidens of the Alahambra. He knocked upon the door. And as he did, he was looking and he caught in his keen eyes a bit of movement above him. And he peered up and he saw above him a sweet feminine face staring down at him. But that face immediately was withdrawn. He waited, thinking that this woman, it seemed, would come down and open the door. She did not. He thought, are my senses deceiving me? Did I even really see something? So he knocked again, a bit louder this time. The head came out again. And when it did, he immediately took off his bonnet that had a beautiful plume upon it, and he said, Senorita, please, could you come down? My falcon has landed in the tower, and I must go return it. I must catch it to return it. And the maiden said, I cannot let you in, I'm sorry, but I have been forbidden by my auntie to let anyone in, especially, are you one of the royal court? And the page said, yes, in fact I am. I am one of the royal court, but I'm a mere page. And the falcon is well, the falcon is the favorite of the queen. If I don't return it, I'll lose my place. Well, the damsel, she heard this, and of course her heart went out, and she pitied this young man, but she said, I'm afraid that you are one of those men that my aunt has told me about, one that I am to avoid at all costs. The page looked up, and in the most sweet tones he said, but I am not one of those men. Please, I beg you, let me go and fetch my falcon, for without it I will lose my place in the court. The damsel's heart was moved. She came down. She opened the door. Now, I will tell you, this page's name was Reyes de Alarcon. Reyes de Alarcon. We'll call him Reyes from here on out. Reyes, if he'd been taken by the beauty of that face above him, when the door opened and he saw this Moorish princess before him, he was unraveled. She was 15, he was 18. She had dark hair, pulled back tightly, parted down the middle perfectly. Her cheeks had this rosy color to them, and her skin was somewhat colored by that warm southern sun. Her figure was that of a young woman just coming into her prime, her maidenhood, and Reyes was taken. Thank you, senorita, he said, and murmuring something to himself about her beauty, he ascended the spiral staircase to the top of the tower, placed the falcon on his wrist, and returned very quickly. By this time, Jacinta had sat herself, for that was her name, Jacinta had sat herself down by the fountain. She was stirred and agitated within. She'd picked up a reel of silk and had begun to take care of it, and she was so agitated that when the page returned, she dropped it on the ground, and it became a tangled mess of silken thread. If you've ever worked with silken thread, it's so light, easily becomes knotted. Well, Reyes, before she could move, had grabbed that reel of silk, and in his hand, he took it to her and gave it to her. She remained seated. And when the hand was outstretched to receive it, and it had taken it, Reyes took her hand and brought it to his lips and kissed it. He kissed it with more passion and fervor than he had ever kissed the hand of the queen. And I can tell you that maid of 15, having never experienced love, and having now a lover there, kneeling before her at her feet, her heart was set aflame. She was speechless. Now, Reyes, seeing that the other camp was in disarray and chaos, thought that perhaps he could profit by this, and he was trying to come up with some very words to profit his situation. But none could come. It was as if he was tongue-tied. The dilemma of lovers. She took in everything that was going on and understood it in her purely innocent heart. The words that did not come was perhaps better to communicate the love and the passion that he was feeling. And the two began to exchange without words a communication that was clear and all about love. We'll leave the story here. Pick it up tomorrow, The Rose of the Alhambra. Have a good rest of your day, and thanks for joining.